Charleston, 11:47 at night. The ninth floor of Ashcombe Wealth Advisors had emptied hours ago. Marlowe stepped from the conference room with 3 folders against her chest. A man in a long coat stood mid-corridor. He had slipped past the lobby guard. Before he spoke, a uniformed officer walked out from the far bend. Not fast, not loud. He placed himself between them. Hands relaxed, eyes still. The stranger stepped back, then retreated. "Who are you?" "Reeves. Night shift." She did not know the man at her door, owned 3 of the shipping firms her company held escrow for. The next morning, Marlowe pulled the incident log Reeves had filed at 12:03. She read it twice. It was not the writing of a security guard. The structure ran like an after-action report. Time of contact to the 10th of a second. Approach vector. Subject behavior. No commentary. No adjectives. She kept the observation to herself. Pressure had been building on the board for a month. Prescott Beaumont, chairman, had been quietly circulating a memo he called a security posture review. In private, 3 directors had already been told the review would recommend Marlowe move into a chairwoman emeritus role, full dividends. No operational authority, clean severance from her grandfather's chair. She poured a second cup of coffee and read the log a third time. There were 4 sentences in the whole document. None of them were wasted. Across the harbor on Sullivan's Island, Colton pulled into the driveway of a small clapboard house 4 blocks from the beach, his mother-in-law's house. His late wife's mother, Hattie, was already at the kitchen table in her school uniform, waiting for oatmeal. She was 8. She had freckles on the bridge of her nose that Emily used to say were saltwater in disguise. "Daddy, the sea turtles came up last night." "Which beach?" "Station 28. Aunt B says the volunteers marked the nest with tape." He listened. He did not take his eyes off her face. He poured brown sugar over her bowl in the exact amount she liked, and no more. Warm. Quiet. At 8:05 she kissed his cheek and went out to B's car. He stood on the porch until the taillights turned onto Middle Street. He waited another minute after they were gone before he went inside. By 9, he was back in his shift jacket, driving over the bridge into the city. The elevator at Ashcombe held 4 people. Marlowe stepped in on the 9th floor and rode down to the 5th for a compliance meeting. Colton got on at the 4th. He carried a clipboard and a radio and the plain composure of a man who had done this job before. She thanked him for the night before in one short sentence. "Ma'am." That was all. He did not look at his phone during the ride. He watched the door and the floor indicator, and nothing else. She noticed the not looking. Most people looked. Back at her desk, she pulled the lobby camera footage from 3 angles. She froze the frame on the intruder's hand. He had been carrying a slim manila folder. On the top edge, half obscured by his thumb, a printed watermark, Ashcombe letterhead. Only internal staff had letterhead. She did not walk it down to Prescott's office. She slid the USB into the top left drawer of her desk and turned the key. An hour later, Prescott came by to ask about her weekend. He asked twice, the second time in the shape of a question about the intrusion. She answered neutrally and did not mention the letterhead. When he left, she looked through the glass wall of her office toward the 9th floor guard station. Colton was walking the west corridor. As Prescott stepped out of the elevator on the 6th floor 2 floors below, Colton stopped mid-stride at the window overlooking the atrium and watched him go. It was not curiosity. It was measurement. The security contract for Ashcombe had been transferred to Palmetto Guard Services 3 months earlier. Prescott had recommended the change. Marlowe had voted against. The board had gone 6-3. That night she stayed past 10. Walking past the guard station on her way out, she passed Colton. He stood as she went by. He nodded. He did not speak. She paused for half a second, then she kept walking. Neither of them knew it was the first time she had registered the presence of a man in the building since her father died. 3 weeks passed. Colton worked clean, silent even. Marlowe read every log, each one shorter than a printed sentence, precise to the second. On a Thursday evening in the 3rd week, a young analyst named Callum Van stayed late to reconcile an escrow discrepancy Marlowe had quietly assigned him to trace. He had been the only person on her staff she trusted with it. At 9:18 he collapsed at his desk, shortness of breath, numbness in the left side of his face. the kind of thing a colleague might have mistaken for a stroke. Colton reached him 7 minutes before the ambulance did. He took the radial pulse and the carotid pulse at the same time with 2 fingers on each. He set Callum on his side. He spoke into the radio in clipped, unadorned language. Airway patent. Radial 118. No bilateral deficit. Likely acute anxiety, not stroke. Bring a bag. Keep sirens off in the garage. The EMTs arrived and confirmed the reading. Callum was sitting up before they left the building. Colton stepped back, wrote the log, and disappeared down the stairwell. Marlo watched the camera footage in her office at 11. She watched it twice. The pulse technique, the recovery position, the vocabulary. That was not a 40-hour security course. That was someone who had done it under fire. She called HR the next morning and asked for the personnel file. It was clean but sparse. Palmetto Guard Services subcontractor, prior military experience listed as U.S. Navy, honorable discharge, 2011, unit blank, rank blank, occupational specialty blank. 3 lines that should have been filled were not. The day after that, a black car pulled up to Ashcomb's lobby at 11:15. Retired Admiral Wexford stepped out. He had a wealth management appointment on the calendar. He had been a client of Ashcombe for 2 decades. He had also, before retirement, commanded the Joint Special Operations Command Southeast Task Force. He walked through the lobby toward the elevator. He passed the security station. He saw Colton. He stopped for exactly half a second. He nodded once. It was not the nod of a stranger to a guard. It was the nod of a man who had once commanded him. Then he moved on. Colton did not react. He continued his rounds. The Admiral's meeting on the 11th floor lasted 40 minutes. On the way out, he did not look at the security station again. That was deliberate. That was training too. Marlo was standing on the mezzanine balcony above the lobby. She saw all of it. That evening, she stayed at her desk. Around 9, Colton passed her office on his rounds. He did not stop. He spoke over his shoulder, low, without turning his head. Your file. My file. Don't leave them open on the desk. He kept walking. She sat still for a long moment. He knew she had pulled the record. He knew she would keep pulling. He was not angry. He was warning her. She sat there for 20 minutes. Then, she opened her laptop and cleared her search history. She sent Delphine a message to cancel the HR request in the morning and to purge the audit trail. Whoever this man was, someone else in the building was watching him and watching her watch him. The net had begun to tighten. Beaumont called an emergency board meeting for the following Monday. The stated purpose was a post-incident security review. The actual purpose was a motion he had drafted himself, which proposed transitioning the Ashcombe security contract from Palmetto Guard Services to a new firm called Coastal Sentinel. The 2 firms shared a parent LLC 3 layers up. Marlo had asked Delphine to trace the ownership chain over the weekend. Delphine had traced it in 4 hours. At the meeting, Marlo let Beaumont present. She let 2 of his allies speak. Then, she stood. I move we table the security review for 30 days pending a full incident data audit. We cannot make an informed vote on this proposal today. The intrusion happened 11 days ago. The forensic report is not complete. The vote came in 5-4. Beaumont's mouth tightened for half a second before he smoothed it. He congratulated her on her diligence. Toward the end of the meeting he said, as if in passing, after all, our escrow clients Reeves Maritime included need to know this building is secure. Colton was standing at the door in security duty. His face did not move. Marlo, seated at the head of the table, saw it. She logged the moment in the private notes she was now keeping in a paper notebook at home. Later that night, walking through the parking garage on level 2, she passed Colton on his patrol. She stopped. Are you always here when your shift ends? Only when there's a chance I need to be. Silence. 4 seconds. She almost asked something else. She did not. She walked to her car. He watched her until the taillights cleared the ramp. Then he stepped behind the concrete pillar and keyed the radio on a private channel. Marlin holding steady, the line hissed once. Then a voice from Georgetown. Beaumont escrow flag. Transaction 4471 flagged this morning. Cross-reference matches wife's file. Ford McAllister, his attorney, his CFO. The only man in the country who knew what Colton was doing in Charleston. Colton did not answer. He clicked off the radio and looked out toward the harbor through the open side of the garage. The container ships were lit up at anchor. He thought about the Shell LLC that had signed off on the maintenance report the week before Emily's plane came apart over the Georgia coast. He thought about how quietly the paperwork had been buried after, and he thought about the woman who had just walked past him without knowing that she had been standing at the exact center of the same web for a year. He drove back to Sullivan's Island at 2 in the morning. Hattie was asleep. On her bed, a book about lighthouses had fallen open at the middle. He straightened the pages and pulled the blanket up. She stirred, half awake. "Daddy, Grandma said you were coming home late again." Grandma was right. "I'm sorry, honey. Do you like the lady you work for?" He thought about it. He answered the way he answered everything the child asked. "She's brave. That's a good thing to be." She was asleep before he stood up. He sat on the front porch until dawn with a mug of cold coffee, looking across the bay toward downtown. From that angle he could see the top 4 floors of the Ashcombe building. The 9th floor was lit. He did not know she was still there. She did not know he was watching. But both of them were awake for the same reason. The intruder from the first night was identified on a Tuesday. Everett Klein, a former Ashcombe accountant terminated in July of 2022 for what the file called a conduct issue. Beaumont had signed the termination memo. The memo was 3 sentences long. There was no investigation file attached. By Thursday, Klein had left Charleston. Marlowe called the detective handling the intrusion case. He told her the file was closing. No property damage, no prints. The department had bigger cases. She thanked him and set the phone down and looked at it for a long time. She heard the door click shut behind that case a little too smoothly. That weekend, she started keeping a private log in a leather notebook she carried home each night. Saturday, 9:47 p.m. Beaumont's access card enters the building. Sunday, 6:12 a.m. Beaumont's access card exits. Duration 2 hours and 11 minutes. The following Sunday, 3 hours and 4 minutes. She pulled server activity logs from the timestamps. His floor, his terminal. Files being copied to an external drive. 3 visits in 14 days. No board reason for any of them. She routed a formal request through Palmetto Guard Services using the standard protocol channels. She asked the night shift supervisor to increase patrol frequency on the executive floor. She did not name the executive. Colton agreed. He wrote a detailed patrol plan. He did not ask why. He also began patrolling the 10th floor stairwell landing, which the plan did not require, at odd intervals. She noticed. She did not mention it. On Wednesday, Beaumont invited her to a private dinner at Husk on Queen Street. He wrote in the email that it was time to clear the air. She accepted. She then invoked the Ashcombe Personal Protection Protocol her grandfather had drafted in 1978. She was entitled to a security escort of her choosing. She chose Colton. Beaumont arrived first. He ordered a bourbon he did not drink. He waited until the entrees to make the offer. "The family has been talking. The emeritus role would keep the dividends whole. It would keep your grandfather's chair with the Ashcombe name. It would lift the operational weight off your shoulders." She thanked him. She declined. He set his glass down more softly than necessary. It was the softest thing he had done all evening. Through the window over his shoulder she could see the neon of a bar across Queen Street. It flickered once and steadied. Walking out of the restaurant onto Queen Street, her hands were unsteady for the first time in the whole week. Colton opened the car door. He did not look at her. He said one word, "Water." He handed her a sealed bottle from the front seat. She drank half of it before they turned onto Meeting Street. He drove her home in silence for 14 minutes. When they reached her house, he did not get out to open her door. He waited for her to open it herself, because he had understood, without needing to be told, that she did not want to need anyone to open a door for her tonight. Before she closed it, she said, "Thank you for the water, ma'am." She closed the door. He sat in the car until the light in her upstairs window went out. Then he started the engine. Friday night was quiet until 1:22 in the morning. The alarm at Marlowe's Sullivan's Island house tripped. She was on the 2nd floor. The intruder had entered through the back porch and gone straight to her study on the ground floor. The study window overlooked the salt marsh. Her desk was against the far wall. The lower drawer had been jimmied. Colton, at his mother-in-law's house 4 doors down, received the alert through the Ashcombe security ring that Marlowe had joined 2 weeks earlier. He was at her front porch in 3 minutes. The Charleston County Sheriff's cruiser was 4 minutes behind him. He did not enter. He stood on the porch with his weapon holstered and legal, and one hand resting on the frame. He waited for the deputies. Only when they entered first did he follow. It was the choice of a man who understood chain of custody, and the way a lawyer would use it against him later if he made the wrong one. Nothing was missing. The lower drawer had been opened. That was the drawer where she kept the USB of the lobby footage from the first night. The USB was still there. The intruder had known exactly where to look. He had chosen not to take it. It was a message. The deputies took the report. They took prints from the drawer. They said they would follow up. They would not. She and Colton both knew that. She did not say it. Neither did he. The deputies left at 4. Marlo did not want to be alone in the house. She did not say so. She sat down on the porch swing and pulled her jacket around her shoulders. Colton sat on the top step of the stairs, facing the road, his back to her. The posture of a man on watch, not a guest. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The tide was coming in. Somewhere down the beach, an oyster catcher called once. "How far is your grandmother's house?" "4 doors. You have a child, a little girl." 8. She did not ask more. He did not offer more. But the quiet after that answer was different from the quiet before it. Dawn came in slowly over the water. The sky turned the color of the inside of a shell. She asked one more question, and it was the only one that mattered. "Reeves, are you actually a security guard?" He looked out toward the marsh. Then he answered, "I'm here to make sure nothing happens to you." Not a lie. Not the whole truth. She heard the difference. She let it stand. At 9 on Saturday morning, her phone buzzed on the porch railing. She looked without picking it up. An email from Prescott Beaumont to the full board. Emergency motion filed. Given repeated security incidents involving the president, the board proposes immediate transition of executive operational authority pending review. Vote in 10 days. She read it twice. Her hand did not shake. She was ready. 9 days before the board vote. Marlo was at her desk until 8:23 at night. Everyone on the 9th floor believed Delphine Rowe had left at 5. She had not. At 8:24, Delphine knocked lightly on the door and stepped in. She closed the door behind her. She placed a brown leather portfolio on Marlo's desk. The leather was old. The right corner had 2 coffee rings darker than the rest of the surface. "Your grandfather gave this to me in June of 2015. He said, 'Delphine, when Prescott moves for the chair, give it to Marlo. Not before, not after.' I have waited 11 years. Marlo opened the portfolio. Inside were 3 sections. The first was a stack of internal audit memos dated 2014 through 2019, initialed by her grandfather and kept out of the official record. They showed a slow and deliberate diversion of escrow funds by Beaumont through 6 shell LLCs. 3 of the shells had already been dissolved. One was still live. It was registered in Delaware under the name Palmetto Coast Logistics. The second section was a client list, the shipping clients whose escrow accounts had been touched. Reeves Maritime Holdings sat at the top of the page. She read the second name. The third, she stopped at Reeves and went back to the top. The third section was a sealed envelope. On the front, in her grandfather's slow blue script, Marlo. She opened it. There was 1 page, 1 sentence, 1 signature, 1 phone number. "If it ever gets to the moment when you don't know who to trust, call this number. He owes me from a night in 1998. Grandpa." The number was a Georgetown area code. She looked up at Delphine. "I don't know whose number it is. He never told me. I only kept it." Delphine let herself out. She closed the door the way she had closed thousands of doors over 30 years, without a sound. Marlo dialed. The line rang twice. A steady voice answered. A man past 50. "McAllister, this is Marlo Ashcombe. My grandfather left me this number." There was a long pause on the other end. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted. Quieter. Warmer. Something like relief. "Miss Ashcombe, Mr. Reeves has been within 100 feet of you for 6 weeks." She did not speak for 11 seconds. Ford McAllister waited. He had waited for her to make this call for 2 years. "I will be in Charleston at 7 tomorrow morning. Please allow Mr. Reeves to speak to you before then. Directly. Tonight, if possible." She hung up. She held the receiver in the cradle for a long time before she let her hand fall away. She turned in her chair and looked out through the glass toward the corridor. Across the hall, at the darkened guard station on the far side of the atrium, Colton stood. Half his face was lit red by the exit sign above the stairwell door. He was watching her office, as he had been watching it, in the same posture, at the same hour, for weeks. She stood up. At 9:47 she led him into the conference room on the 9th floor. She closed the door. She drew the blinds. She did not turn on the overhead lights, only the small desk lamp at the head of the table. She set Delphine's portfolio down. She placed her grandfather's page on top. "You own Reeves Maritime." He nodded once, slowly. "You came here because of my escrow." "I came here because of the name of a shell LLC that appeared in my wife's death file. Emily, private plane, March of 2024. Faulty maintenance record." The contractor's paperwork was routed through an LLC called Palmetto Coast Logistics. The same LLC appeared on a routing memo tied to one of your escrow accounts in April of this year. Same signature style, same Delaware seal. "I came to see for myself. You didn't know I was on your side. Not until the second week. By the 4th I was sure. By the 6th I knew you were fighting him alone and you had no proof yet. You could have told me. I couldn't." If Beaumont had known Reeves Maritime was investigating, he would have burned the escrow files in a single night. He would have been packed before you reached the elevator. You would have lost the company. I would have lost my wife's case. She was quiet for 12 seconds. He waited. He did not apologize. He did not explain further. He knew she was weighing it. She was not weighing whether to trust him. She was weighing what to do with the anger that came with the trust. "Show me everything." He opened his own laptop, not the security tablet, his own. He walked her through the Reeves Maritime internal investigation. He laid it down beside the memos from Delphine's portfolio. The two files read like two halves of the same book. Names in his file appeared in her grandfather's memos. Dates in her grandfather's memos matched wire transfers in his. Somewhere around midnight she stopped writing notes and simply read. They built the plan in the hours after. 8 days out from the board vote, Marlowe would coordinate an SEC filing through the Ashcombe legal team, which she had chosen a year ago in anticipation of a day like this, without knowing what shape the day would take. Ford McAllister would coordinate the FBI Charleston field office out of Georgetown, using the introduction letter from Wexford. Colton would maintain his cover as a night shift security supervisor until the very hour of the board meeting. Beaumont would suspect nothing until he had already sat down in his chair. Around 1, she said, "What about Hattie?" He paused for 1 full second. "She doesn't know what company I own. To her, I work nights. That is all I have told her." She understood. At 11:14, he drove home to Sullivan's Island. Hattie was asleep. On the small bedside table, in a wooden frame, was a photograph of Emily on the beach at Isle of Palms, taken when Hattie was 3. He straightened the frame. It had become a habit 2 years ago and had never stopped. He kissed his daughter's forehead. He sat in the chair beside her bed for 20 minutes. The window was open. Salt air came in from the marsh. Hattie stirred in her sleep. "Daddy, is she okay?" "She's the bravest person I know." "Good." He was asleep again before he stood up. The boardroom, Tuesday, 10 in the morning. 9 of 9 members present. Beaumont came in composed, a white shirt, a Hermes tie. He moved his motion to transition Marlowe's executive authority to a review committee he had already staffed. Marlowe let him read the entire motion. She let him finish. Then she opened her leather case. She took out 9 bound audit binders. She placed one in front of each member. Delphine distributed them. Delphine did not sit down. The board began to read. The room grew still by degrees. An older director on the far end reached the Shell LLC page and did not look back at the file. He looked at Beaumont, then he closed the binder and set his hand flat on top of it. Beaumont's voice was dry. "Where did you get these?" "From my grandfather." He handed them to Delphine Rowe in 2015 with instructions to give them to me on the day he knew was coming. Delphine stood, confirmed the chain of custody in 3 sentences, and sat back down. The room stayed still. The door opened. Colton stepped inside. He was not in the security uniform. He wore a dark navy suit, plain collar, no tie. Ford McAllister followed him, carrying a briefcase. "Colton Reeves, founder and majority shareholder of Reeves Maritime Holdings. Reeves Maritime is one of 4 shipping clients whose escrow was diverted through Palmetto Coast Logistics from 2018 to 2026. I have worked as the night shift security supervisor in this building for 7 weeks and 4 days. An older woman on the board said softly, "Oh, my God." Beaumont looked up slowly. Recognition arrived on his face like weather. He said nothing. The original motion was withdrawn. The senior independent director moved to remove Beaumont from the board pending SEC and FBI investigation, and to refer the criminal matter to the United States Attorney's Office for the District of South Carolina. The vote came 7-2. The lobby door opened. 2 FBI agents and 1 SEC investigator had been in the building since 9/47. Beaumont was escorted out, not in cuffs, not with drama, only with the phrase voluntary questioning. His attorney was called from the sidewalk. At the threshold of the boardroom, he stopped and turned back. He looked at Colton for a long second. "You were the guard." "I was." The door closed behind him. The board members filed out one at a time. 2 of them stopped and said something quiet to Marlowe on their way past. The rest simply nodded and left. Marlowe stood alone at the head of the table for 20 seconds. Colton waited at the door. She looked up. He did not speak. She did not speak. She nodded once. It was not the nod of a president acknowledging her security officer. It was the nod of 2 people who had just walked through the same door together. He nodded back. He left the room before her. She followed him out at half a step behind. 2 weeks later, Ashcombe had steadied. Marlowe restructured the board. She brought in 3 independent directors and severed every connection to Beaumont's network. The firm lost 3.7% of assets under management in the short term and kept every old money client on the books. She wrote handwritten letters to each of them. She signed them at her desk one at a time. Colton returned to Reeves Maritime Holdings in Georgetown for 4 days. He walked the executive floor of his own company. He read 3 months of memos he had not been present for. He signed what needed signing. Then he quietly asked Ford to open a satellite office in Charleston, on East Bay Street. 12 minutes on foot from Ashcombe. There was no opening ceremony. There was only a small brass plate beside the door. On the first Saturday of April, they met each other for the first time as themselves. A small cafe on East Battery, facing Fort Sumter across the water. It was not a date. It was not on the calendar. It was 2 people on opposite sides of a small wooden table with black coffee, no sugar. "When did you know it was me?" "Day 3. "How?" "The way you read my logs. You read the sentence structure, not just the content." She thought about that for a moment. "I knew you weren't a security guard by the 2nd week. I didn't know who you were. I knew that, too." She laughed once, quietly. It was the first time. She did not say anything else for a while. Neither did he. They sat and watched a container ship move slowly out toward the ocean. She thought about how many of those hulls he probably owned outright, and how little that fact seemed to matter to either of them at this particular table. Sunday afternoon, Colton took Hattie to the harbor for her first sailing lesson at the junior club. Marlowe came. She had been invited by a single text message sent from Colton's phone by Hattie herself. "Daddy said you can come if you want to." Hattie, holding a short length of rope in her small hands, looked up at Marlowe. "You're the brave lady Daddy told me about." "Your dad said that?" "Twice." Marlowe crouched down next to her and showed her how to tie a bowline knot. It took 3 tries. On the 4th, the loop held. Colton stood 3 steps away with his hands in his coat pockets and did not interrupt. On Monday morning, on Marlowe's desk at Ashcombe, there was a single folded piece of paper. The handwriting was the same handwriting from 2 months of security logs she had read line by line at night in her office. "Tell me when it is too much. Not before, not after." There was no name at the bottom. It did not need one. 6 months later. Mid-April. Charleston was in dogwood season. Ashcombe had passed its post-remediation audit by a Big 4 firm without a finding. The firm had opened a second office in Savannah. Marlowe cut the ribbon herself at a small breakfast, with Delphine sitting in the front row. Marlowe held a seat on the Ethics Advisory Board of Reeves Maritime Holdings. The position was formal and compensated and disclosed in the SEC filings. Colton remained founder and CEO of Reeves Maritime. He came into the Charleston office 4 days a week. He ate dinner with Hattie every night. His mother-in-law had moved to daytime only. The photograph of Emily still stood on the small bedside table in Hattie's room. It was still in the same wooden frame. Colton still straightened it every evening. Marlowe had never once asked him to move it. He knew she never would. It was one of the things they had understood about each other without saying. Delphine Rowe had retired in February. Marlowe had given her a small, plain watch with a thin, round face. On the inside of the case back, 4 words were engraved. 11 years. M.A. Delphine had opened it at her kitchen table on Wentworth Street and said only, "Thank you, dear." Then she had put it on and closed the box and taken it off again to look at the engraving one more time. On Easter Sunday, Colton, Hattie, and Marlowe walked south along Rainbow Row. Morning light came through the pastel facades in bands of pink and green and cream. Hattie walked between them. She held Marlowe's hand on the left. She held her father's hand on the right. Colton let himself fall half a step behind, so the child could hold Marlowe's hand a little tighter. At the corner of Trad Street, Hattie tilted her face up. "Are you going to marry my daddy?" Marlowe smiled quietly. "That's up to your dad. Daddy told me to ask you." From behind them, Colton said, very low, "I did not tell you to ask her. You didn't tell me not to." Marlowe and Colton looked at each other over the child's head. Neither said yes, neither said no. They kept walking. Hattie held on to both hands. At the far end of Rainbow Row, Marlowe stopped in front of an old blue door. The paint had faded to something between the color of the sky and the color of the sea. Colton stopped beside her, 1 step apart. He did not reach for her. She did not turn to face him, but she said, quiet enough that only he could hear, "Thank you for standing at my door, ma'am." Very soft. Then, after a small pause, "Marlowe." It was the first time he had said her name. He had come as a stranger to guard her door. He stayed because she had already been standing at his.